Reincarnation. The idea that we return to another body after the death of our current body has fascinated humanity since the beginning of time. It raises arresting questions.
What is life? What is consciousness?
Is there a biological base of consciousness?
It's the kind of question that we cannot address from a scientific point of view.
Is birth really the beginning?
It's one of the more difficult questions from either from a scientific or a philosophical standpoint.
Is death truly the end?
Presumably, everyone has had past lives.
New discoveries from the frontiers of consciousness studies.
You cannot reduce mind consciousness to brain activity.
Near-death experiences.
Consciousness separates from the body and goes over the body.
And past life memories research.
There is some entity that carries on.
Are shedding new light on the way we look at life. Science today is witnessing a paradigm shift.
The paradigm shift is going to affect us in a major way.
New alternative explanations are emerging.
Science is really good at experiments and theory development, and marry that with the mystical experience, we'll develop a whole new civilization.
Could it be that now, finally, we are closer to understanding the timeless mysteries of life, death, and reincarnation?
Of course, we all know about reincarnation.
The body may live and die, but it comes to be again.
What is it that reincarnates?
The nature of the soul is that it's eternal.
Vedic literature presents the soul as a very real entity.
I am the soul and I have a body.
Various cultures around the world provide interesting insights into this journey of the soul.
When reincarnation arises in Greek philosophy, it comes in that crystallized form.
Reincarnation has enjoyed widespread acceptance throughout most of known human history.
The belief systems in the West have totally inhibited us from seeing what's right in front of us.
The word reincarnation refers to the concept that human beings, and perhaps non-human beings, consist of two separable components: a physical body and a psychical entity called the soul. At the death of a physical body, the soul persists and eventually becomes associated with a new body. Though the transmigration of the soul has been widely accepted throughout history and across cultures, as seen in Eastern, Roman, and Greek philosophies, to most people today, reincarnation is mostly conceptual. To them, it is one of the many plausible explanations for what happens to us after we die. The specific details of the reincarnation process remain a mystery to those who regard it as a tenet of Eastern religion or a nebulous New Age phenomenon. So where can we find precise information about reincarnation and its mechanism? Various cultures, belief systems and philosophies around the world, from Greek Platonism to Buddhism, Sikhism, and American and Australian indigenous cultures, provide interesting insights into this journey of the soul. Some may have reservations about consulting ancient texts in our present scientific age. Considering past insights is, however, a time-honored tradition, even within the world of science.
Our knowledge is evolving. So the part of the issue then is, if we want science to be more comprehensive and correct, and we want to use the best of the ancient traditions, the wisdom traditions, we should see both of them as being dynamic. We need to pick and choose from both of them to make it a better and better multiple path, rather than simply one way of knowing. So the wisdom traditions have a lot to say about interiority, about the subjective world. Science is really good about the objective world. In order to know the comprehensive world, we need to combine both of those in some meaningful way.
The roots of reincarnation can be traced back to ancient India and its philosophical texts. The Vedic Literature Library provides a detailed framework to understand the mechanism of reincarnation.
I look at the texts themselves, without any preconceived idea. Of course, we all know about reincarnation, but I look at the texts and see what they have to say. So we have to start with the oldest, with the Rig Veda, and then work our way down to the Upanishads, where the concept is very clear, you see. And that, again, over quite a number of Vedic texts, in 4 layers or so, you can see how that concept developed.
Central to the idea of reincarnation is the question, what is it that reincarnates? Or what passes from one body to another?
When we talk about reincarnation or rebirth, the essential question is, what exactly is it that is reincarnating or being reborn? There's very little that all Indian religious thinkers would agree on. But I think we can say that a sort of pan-Indian view is that the nature of the soul and the nature of the self is that it's eternal. And anything that's eternal was never created. And if it was never created, that means it must have been somewhere in the past, namely before this particular birth.
Vedic literature presents the soul as something concrete, a very real entity with its own distinctive characteristics.
In the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, the immortal nature of the soul is emphasized. Over and over again, these verses remind us that the soul is immortal. The body may live and die, but it comes to be again. And these verses are recited even now in Hindu funerals, cremation rituals, to remind us and to comfort human beings that the same soul which you knew here will take another form and be another being at a different time. And so you may not know or recognize that person, but that soul is eternal. And the Bhagavad Gita says, it is not born, it does not die. Having been, it will never not be. Unborn, enduring, constant and primordial. It's not killed when the body is killed.
It is this indestructible, spiritual, and eternal nature of the soul that underscores the fact that the soul and the body are fundamentally different.
If there is soul, which is considered to be ajo nitya shashvatoyam purano nahanyate hanyamane sharike, as the Upanishad says at the Gita too. Ajo nitya, this is self-born, nitya, permanent, shashvata, eternal, purana, ancient, nahanyate hanyamane sharike, even if the body is killed, it is not killed. So therefore, it has its existence.
Why is the soul so amazing? One reason is the incredible variety of bodies it can inhabit. It is certainly amazing that the soul, atomic in size, resides within a redwood tree thousands of years old and almost 100 meters tall, and also in a microbic germ, millions of which can occupy only an inch of space. The soul can power not only the gigantic body of a whale, but also the tiny bodies of the plankton that the whale feeds on. Isn't that a humbling thought? The body may have the full biochemical, functional capacity to move, but it can't do so without something or someone to do the moving. The body needs the soul.
We sometimes say in the West, I have a soul. But I think from the Bhagavad Gita's perspective, it'd be more correct to say, I am the soul and I have a body. The soul is what provides cognition to an awareness to the body. And it's the soul that is the part of us that is aware, that feels.
If the soul is the part that feels, that provides recognition or awareness of I, then consciousness and the source of consciousness are not mysteries anymore.
The soul as like the sun, it illuminates a particular area. Sometimes it's described like a lamp or a candle. It provides the light of a candle will fill up a room in the same way that the illumination of the soul will fill up the body.
What does that mean? Who are we? We are the source of consciousness in the body, the eternal soul. It is this soul which is the meaning giver to the body, and not the other way around. The fact that the body and the soul are fundamentally different makes it possible for the soul to move from one body to another. This is an essential component in the process of reincarnation.
As a man discards worn-out clothes to put on new and different ones, so the embodied self discards its worn-out bodies to take on the new ones. It's a very powerful simile in which we throw out clothes which are of no more use to us and take on and rejoice in new ones. So that death is not really a time to feel sad, we're only discarding stuff which we don't need anymore.
This ongoing cycle of birth and death gives a definite sense of relationship between the perishable body and the eternal soul.
The general view of the Atman is that it possesses three qualities: that it is eternal, it is conscious, and it has ananda. These are terms that are used in the Upanishads and Vedanta. It has bliss.
How is this eternal, enlightened, and blissful nature of the soul perceivable in our present embodied existence? Nearly all of us long to live forever. Even the tiniest creatures take the most amazing measures to avoid death. This universal will to live is all the more remarkable when we consider that death is the most undeniable fact of life. Why do we have such a deep-rooted desire for eternal existence, something that is so utterly impossible for the body to attain? Where does this deep-rooted longing come from? Perhaps this longing comes from the innermost essence of our being, the soul, which is by nature eternal. We long to live forever because we, as souls, are eternal. All of us are insatiably curious. Some people are curious about celebrity gossip, others about breaking news, still others about the stars in the sky. And human beings are not alone in their curiosity. If we try to understand our curiosity in the context of being no more than physical bodies, we will come to a dead end. This insatiable curiosity originates in the soul, which is by nature conscious and full of knowledge. All of us instinctively seek happiness, be it through humor, risk, adventure, entertainment, romance, or anything else. Pleasure is what we constantly seek. Once again, we are not alone. Studies of animal behavior have shown that they too strive for pleasure. The body allows us so few avenues through which we can get pleasure, as it is the cause of much grief as well. If we were just our physical bodies, then why would we have a thirst for pleasure that we are so ill-equipped to satisfy? Our thirst for pleasure originates in the joyfulness inherent to the soul. We might wonder then, if we are actually immortal, full of knowledge and bliss, then why don't we feel so? The answer lies in how deeply the soul is buried. Our past materialistic actions create deep impressions on our psyche that almost entirely obscure our awareness of the soul or our spiritual identity or consciousness. Further, it is the covering of this consciousness that differentiates between humans, animals, and plants.
Text like the Bhagavad Gita is not man-centered, anthropocentric. It's not saying that human beings are the only ones that have a soul, as many of the Western religions want to say. The Hindu texts want to say, if it possesses the characteristics of consciousness, if it's aware, and clearly plants and animals, and even very, very primitive plants and animals, are in some rudimentary sense aware of the world. Therefore, they must also be Atmans, they must be individual souls.
But the human body has a unique capacity for metaphysical inquiry. And this capacity is not just due to the presence of the soul, but it exists because the human body covers the consciousness of the soul to a lesser degree than that of an animal or a plant. This view integrates all living beings within a progression of spiritual evolution. No living being lives in vain and dies without reason. Every living being, no matter how insignificant its life may seem, takes small yet significant steps towards this evolution.
So we may be a human being, we could be an animal. It is a creature. And therefore, all these creatures at some point will reach liberation.
This concept of reincarnation is seen in other important Eastern religions, like Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism, that originated on the Indian subcontinent.
This notion of karma becomes common in many of the religions that began in India at the same time. So Gautama, the Buddha, Mahavira shared a kind of common ethos from which this notion of karma and reincarnation and eventually a liberation, a moksha, that is, complete end to this process of reincarnation, is spelled out in fairly good detail.
Reincarnation is central to the teachings of the Buddha and to Buddhist thought in general, as seen in the Jataka tales, which are stories of the Buddha's past incarnations, many of which are said to have been told by the Buddha himself. These tales illustrate the compassion of the Buddha by describing how he incarnated as a god, as an animal, and even as a tree in order to help souls in various stages of bondage to attain liberation or nirvana or moksha. For example, one tale tells how he was born as an elephant and helped a woman in distress by making immense sacrifices, even filing off his tusks for her sake. That woman, recollecting his selfless sacrifice, in her next life became his disciple and went on to become a great saint. Much like Buddhism, Jainism too believes in reincarnation. The sacred texts of Jainism lay particular emphasis on karma as a fundamental concept, closely interlinked with the philosophical concepts of transmigration, reincarnation, liberation, non-violence, and non-attachment. The Uttaradhyayana Sutra states that on account of its karma, the soul takes birth sometimes as an ant, or an animal, or bird, or human, or into the different worlds of God, of demons, and so on. The soul bound by karma goes round and round in the cycle of birth and death till it achieves liberation. Reincarnation is also central in the belief system of Sikhism. Guru Granth Sahib, the holy text of Sikhism, states that all living beings, including animals, have souls, and the souls go through different life forms until they are purified to become one with God. Further, it states that there are 8.4 million species, and the soul goes through them all. To break the cycle of life and death, one has to serve the true Guru and meditate upon the Word of God. Then one attains salvation. For then, the cycle of birth and death is eliminated. A little further west, the ancient religions of the Mediterranean world developed quite different kinds of reincarnation beliefs. For instance, Greek Platonism asserted the pre-existence of the soul in the celestial world and its fall in the human body due to sin. In order to be liberated from its bondage and return to the state of pure being, the soul needed to be purified through reincarnation. In stating such beliefs, Plato shows the influence of the earlier philosophical schools of Orphism and Pythagoreanism. The first important Greek philosophical system that adopted a view on reincarnation was Neoplatonism in the 3rd century AD, under certain Eastern influences.
When reincarnation arises in Greek philosophy, in this person of Pythagoras, we think, it comes in that crystallized form that took many centuries to develop in India. And again, that's some indirect evidence, as good as we can get, it seems, that the doctrine came from India into Greece.
Perhaps the most colourful explanation or story about reincarnation comes in the dialogue of Phaedrus, where the soul is analogized as a chariot drawn by 2 horses. One is the dark horse, full of spirit and energy, but hard to control. And the other, a white horse, who is easier and also full of spirit, but more obedient.
In the Phaedrus reincarnation story, he imagines the soul, upon bodily death, ascending up into heaven. These horses get wings through a longer story about falling in love. That's perhaps not relevant here. As the soul rises, it can gain a glimpse of a beautiful field of what Plato calls forms. So perfect beauty, perfect justice, and so on. And there's a procession of gods watching this field. And as you rise, you can join that procession. And if reason is in supreme control, it seems, the chariot can rise and stay there. And that would be like Lucis or Moksha in the Indian doctrine, escaping from the cycle of reincarnation. But if reason's not in good control, if the horses are doing what they want, they're going to lose interest in that field of beautiful forms. It's not something that they can really appreciate. And so they pull the chariot back down, and the soul goes back into another incarnation.
In Greek terminology, psychosis gets translated as reincarnation, and catharsis as purification. And to finally escape from the cycle of reincarnation is the substitute for moksha. So, purification is the goal. It seems that for Greek philosophers, their intellectual activities and religious practices were all efforts to purify their souls, so that when they were reborn, they would be born into better human reincarnations.
Plato actually spells out the hierarchy of people. So I mentioned Empedocles had a gesture towards a hierarchy of people and a hierarchy of species. Plato makes it all explicit. He thinks the best incarnation is to be a philosopher, a lover of wisdom and of beauty, and that if you are a good philosopher, you'll eventually escape human life altogether and live with the gods and perceive the forms. And then he spells out 7 degenerate incarnations, and they go all the way down through poets and farmers and tyrants at the bottom. Similarly, Plato thinks there's a hierarchy of animals. So people who are very angry as human beings, if they let their anger get control of them, if that white horse pulls the chariot off, they'll be reincarnated as lions. Or if they're too subservient to their bodily appetites and they're too tied to the earth, they'll come back as snakes. They'll slither along the earth, and so on.
So, according to the Greek philosophy, our present life is actually a preparation for the afterlife. Plato says it quite clearly in his book, Phaedrus. Philosophy is the preparation of death. What is death? What happens to us when we die? Vedic wisdom answers this profound question by outlining broad principles that shape the soul's journey after the body dies. The 3 stages of the soul's post-mortem journey also establish the process of reincarnation. The soul leaves the present body. It travels to the location of its next body, and then it enters the next body. According to this model, the soul is concealed by our physical body, which is referred to as the gross material body, and a subtle body, which consists of the mind, the intelligence, and the ego.
One of the great contributions of a text like the Bhagavad Gita and more largely schools of Sankhya and Yoga, and this would include Nyaya as well, is that there's three distinct things that they recognize. There's the gross physical world, and that would include the physical body. That's the visible physical body. This is something we call material. It's part of Prakriti, material nature. Its definition being that it's always in a state of transformation and flux. It's moving. They also recognize that part of the material nature is something we might call a subtle reality, a subtle dimension, or a subtle body composed of what we call the mind. And this mind has different components to it. And the third thing that they recognize, and I do believe this is not something that's widely discussed in Western philosophy and theology, and therefore not discussed in Western science, is that they recognize consciousness as entirely separate from that. So you've got a gross physical body, the visible body. You've got the more subjective component of the mind. And then you've got a third thing called consciousness, or the Atman, or the Purusha. And the first two are entirely material. They are not considered to be part of the soul or the self at all. The soul is completely separable from both the mind and the body. And it can exist independently of them.
The subtle body is the medium through which the soul interacts with the gross body and the world outside. It is a repository of our past experiences and is responsible for making decisions on the basis of loss and gain. It also makes us believe that all we are is this body and not the soul. Can this relationship between the consciousness, the soul, and the body offer a potential explanation for the baffling phenomenon of near-death experiences and past life memories? There have been several documented cases in which people in states of medical unconsciousness have reported near-death experiences in which they have left their bodies and then accurately perceived what was going on around them. How can anyone perceive anything, accurately or inaccurately, while clinically brain-dead? If we understand that consciousness is transmitted through the subtle body to the brain, and then from the brain to the external world, then it is not a perplexing phenomenon anymore. When a person is unconscious, the normal pathway for seeing is obstructed, as the physical eyes are closed and the visual areas of the brain are not functioning. Nonetheless, the soul is always conscious. In fact, it is consciousness itself. And the subtle sense of sight is still capable of functioning. The soul, along with the subtle body, temporarily leaves the gross body, which is likely to happen under special circumstances when the body is severely distressed, damaged, or dysfunctional. In these kinds of situations, the soul can observe the gross body from outside itself, using the subtle sense of sight. This can account for the factual perceptions documented during near-death experiences, and can also explain a phenomenon even more puzzling: the ability of some blind patients to see during near-death experiences. There are numerous documented cases in which children in various parts of the world remember precise details about deceased people who they claim to have been in a previous life. At the moment of death, the soul and the subtle body leave the gross body and move to another gross body. The memories are stored not just in the physical brain, but also in the mind part of the subtle body. Theoretically, memories from one's past lives are available for recall in the present and future lives. But generally speaking, these memories are so deep within the mind that for most of us, they don't seem to exist at all. Nonetheless, in some rare individuals, memories of a past life remain. Often this is true for individuals who died suddenly, violently, or both. Because death is so abrupt and traumatizing in such a case, it may not allow the soul to fully process the death, and so unprocessed memories of the event remain in the next body as a sort of hangover. This can also offer an explanation for birthmarks and birth defects in some cases, involving past life memories. Many scientifically documented reports have shown that mental impressions can manifest themselves as physical marks on the body. The impressions of fatal wounds inflicted on the gross body are created in the mind. When that mind accompanies the soul into the next body, it can cause those impressions to be expressed as birthmarks or birth defects. Death actually occurs when the soul permanently leaves the gross material body.
One of the ways that the later tradition develops that this happens is through a term called the ahankara, or the ego. And it's the ego that allows this non-physical, this completely spiritual self to inhabit a particular body. The ego is what makes, it ties the non-physical soul to the mental and the physical bodies. In a text like the Bhagavata Purana, it's described as a knot. It's what causes the connection between the non-physical self and the mental and the physical.
When the soul exits from the gross body at the moment of death, it is encapsulated within the subtle body. The gateway through which a soul departs indicates its next destination.
The ideal place to leave was sort of the upper part of the body through one of the chakras, or these centers of energy within the body that were sort of circular and provided sort of gateways between the external and the internal, the physical bodies.
Souls that depart through the holes in the head continue on towards the higher, more evolved realms of the universe, whereas the souls that depart through the other holes are headed toward lower, less evolved realms.
The Puranas in general paint very, very elaborate and interesting pictures about what happens at death. And because there's so many different types of karmas, people are performing so many different types of actions, the post-mortem life, or after-death life, is very different for different people. And in general, the Hindu and Indian world more largely, it's quite a populated universe. There's a lot happening behind the scenes. There are gods in heaven who are in some way interacting with the human realm. And in between humans and gods, there's all kinds of different creatures. There's embodied lives of ghosts, and there's under realms as well. There's realms of the Nagas, of the reptilians, and all of these different places are candidates for the soul. You can go to any type of these different realms. And so you get these very elaborate and detailed descriptions about all kinds of worlds and spaces that exist still within the material sphere, but it's a very colorful, variegated, an interesting place. It's not, which really fundamentally differs from the way that modern science and largely Christian and Jewish theology look at the world, which is much more of a sort of, there's the human realm, and then there's a heavenly realm, and there's not too much space in between. Whereas for the Indian universe, there's a lot happening between human life and sort of the ultimate liberated life. It's a pretty interesting and colorful space in between.
When the soul sets off on its journey to the next body, it is given a transitional body. Equipped with this body, the soul is taken by nature's arrangement to its next destination. In exceptional cases, when the soul does not get a next physical body, then it stays in a disembodied state. Souls that are victims of extreme behaviors such as suicide and abnormal attachment live in this disembodied existence and are called ghosts for a variable interval of time. Typically, the body a particular soul gets is determined by the broad principles that underlie the mechanism of reincarnation. Reincarnation is, therefore, something like taking off an old suit and putting on a new one. Just as the type of suit we wear is usually determined by our taste and our budget, the soul's new suit is determined by its desires, its attachments, and the karma it has acquired. Similar to the belief system of the Greeks, as detailed by Plato, the 8.4 million species of the world are arranged in a graded hierarchy, with aquatics and plants at the bottom and humans at the top. Those towards the bottom are limited and depend on nature's arrangement to be elevated to the higher levels of the hierarchy. Thus, this hierarchy serves as the pathway for the progressive reincarnation of the soul. But this changes when the soul gets a human body. Why? Because the human body allows the soul to express its free will. The capacity of the human body to redirect its consciousness from a material to a spiritual level offers the soul an opportunity to escape the cycle of reincarnation and attain an eternal life. When we attain this destination, the mystery of reincarnation is unraveled. Death transcended, eternity reclaimed.
And that's meant to comfort all of us. But the Bhagavad Gita is probably the central place one would go to when one thinks about eternal life, the reincarnation, as well as the end to the process of reincarnation. The cycles of coming and being and dying come to an end at some point, and that is moksha, of course.
The soul, equipped with this knowledge, can reside with the ever-loving, all-attractive absolute truth. This is the final destination of the soul.
The aim is always to get a sense of what the nature of the Lord is, Bhagavan Sri Krishna. The aim is not simply to describe the natural world for its own sake. That doesn't mean that the way that they are describing the world is inaccurate or accurate. But it's important to keep in mind aims and intentions when you're looking at any type of literature, any type of book.
These ideas have striking similarities with the Platonic philosophy of death and reincarnation. Although they can be attributed to the close exchanges between Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe, the fact is that many cultures of the world have believed in reincarnation and continue to do so at present. The belief has been reported in several groups from diverse locations, including some Islamic sects of Western Asia, of Alevis and Druzes from Lebanon, numerous natives in North America, especially the northwest areas including Alaska, many tribes of East and West Africa, the Trobriand Islanders of the South Pacific, and the northern tribes of Central Australia. Haida Gwaii is an archipelago on the north coast of British Columbia, Canada, which is populated mostly by Haida people. The First Nations people of British Columbia experience reincarnation as a revitalization of their culture. Dr. Antonia Mills, an anthropologist, documents the perseverance of reincarnation experiences among the Beaver and Gitxuan people. She has been visiting Haida Gwaii, commonly known as Queen Charlotte Islands, and interacting with Haida people since 1984.
I have been doing a lot of research with reincarnation among indigenous peoples in North America, and I did not expect that when I went to do research towards my PhD at Harvard with the Beaver Indians who are in northeastern British Columbia. And I was surprised that when a new baby would be born, they'd say, "Oh, this is such and such an elder, come back."
Amongst the Haidas, reincarnation isn't mysterious. That's the way it is. So, the old people would say, you don't have to fear death, but you certainly don't need to rush to it either. It'll come, in its time. And so when it does, there's certain understandings of how it works. Like for instance, it depends on how you die to where you go. Like if you die in battle, you go to Tahit's house, and if you die another way, you go to these different places, and so then you come back to the earth. Your spirit or your soul will remain. It'll come back and inhabit another vessel. So it's not particularly that mysterious, and seems like a lot of people do understand it in that way. A lot of other cultures beside our own. So amongst our people, there's a lot of stories where there's good evidence, like of somebody putting things away before they die, and then in the next incarnation going and retrieving it is one pretty extreme example, because it's not as if you come back as the same person. You're starting again. You build your own personage and become a different new person. So you got to get on and live the next life that you're given, and so on.
In some instances, we could surmise that the belief spread by normal means of communication, as we know that there has been some communication between India and Western Asia since prehistoric times, and it is quite possible that the belief in reincarnation in India had some influence on its occurrence in Western Asia. But such normal communication could not possibly account for the occurrence of the belief in Western Africa and northwestern Canada, both of which have been effectively isolated.
I didn't know that Native people, that reincarnation is a deep part of their worldview and spiritual belief. And so in my PhD thesis, I looked to see whether the tenets that I saw of the Beaver Indian worldview were present in the other North American culture areas in North America, and further search and the book Amerindian Rebirth, Reincarnation Belief Among North American Indians and Inuit documents the thoroughness of belief in reincarnation in North America. It's before it was known that the indigenous people in Australia, many peoples in Africa, and Ian studied a number of them, such as the Igbo, have belief in reincarnation.
It is therefore quite plausible that the belief in reincarnation arose independently in different places, in different times. It is obviously not just one or two of the world's cultures that have accepted reincarnation as a part of their worldview. Various religions that occupy a significant place in any culture also accept reincarnation. Though reincarnation is widely accepted by Eastern religions, its presence in the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are unclear.
In my research of reincarnation, I found that reincarnation has been part of mystical Judaism for centuries, the Kabbalah. It was part of early Christianity, and the Roman Church did a pretty good job of eradicating the belief in the West. So there is precedent for believing in reincarnation. A lot of indigenous cultures have had a belief in reincarnation. And if you do a survey of all the beliefs around the world, almost in every place, in every isolated place across the world, some concept of reincarnation has emerged. It's just as natural as watching the cycles in nature. And people have known this forever. So I think that the belief systems in the West have totally inhibited us from seeing what's right in front of us.
Christians nowadays rarely believe in reincarnation. Certainly the Catholic Church doesn't believe in reincarnation. But one of its most famous saints, arguably its most influential teacher, St. Augustine, wrote a book on free choice of the will. And in that book, he talks about possibilities for an afterlife. And one of the possibilities he entertains is reincarnation. And he doesn't rule it out. And this is, to my mind, it's been neglected, and something that has to be discussed more, I think, by Christians.
Global expansion of European colonialism and the Abrahamic faiths also led to disbelief in reincarnation further west and in the westernized parts of the East. But we can still infer that the principle of reincarnation has enjoyed widespread acceptance throughout most of known human history, and presents a global intellectual appeal. Ralph Waldo Emerson, an American poet and father of the Transcendentalist movement in the 19th century, said, "The soul comes from without into the human body, as into a temporary abode, and it goes out of it anew. It passes into other habitations, for the soul is immortal." Tracing back humanity's thought footprints about reincarnation from early antiquity to the present day, across a wide spectrum of time, faiths, civilizations, and great thinkers, at least one thing stands to reason. The idea of reincarnation has always existed, and is deeply entwined with man's philosophical journey. If we agree that our body is peripheral to our core identity, all bodily differences stand exposed as inconsequential. We may have been born and bred in different races, classes, nations, cultures, or even religions. But all these categories apply only to our bodies. Beyond these bodies are our souls. A sense of awareness that life is an unending continuum in which death is a milestone that we have passed many times before, helps expand the horizons of our consciousness far beyond death in this lifetime, to the ultimate destination of eternal happiness. This reincarnation worldview offers us freedom from materialism, bodily discrimination, fear of death, and the agony of bereavement. Ours is an age characterized by a zeal for freedom and a willingness to sacrifice anything for that end. Maybe it's time to direct that zeal toward gaining all these freedoms and sacrificing whatever preconceptions stand in our way. As the famed Austrian philosopher Rudolf Steiner once said, "Just as an age was once ready to receive the Copernican theory of the universe, so is our age ready for the idea of reincarnation to be brought into the general consciousness of humanity."